everyone, I am back today to talk to you all about something that is not actually planner related but is something that's very close to my heart. So on the 17th of November it's World Prematurity Day, and as some of you may know, my daughter was born prematurely. So I wanted to talk a little bit about her birth, the IVF process that we went through in order to have Abby, and just to have a little bit of a chatty video that's not planner related. So if you were looking for something planner related, this might not be the video for you. Things that you might need during this video. I've got some tissues because it's a bit of an emotional story for me, and I'm not 100% sure that I'm not going to cry. I'm going to try and keep it together. Other things that you might want: good old-fashioned cup of tea, because it might be a bit of a long video. I'm sorry for the lighting. I've moved areas in my house and now I have this little corner, but the lighting is ridiculous. There's nothing I can do about it, so I'm incredibly sorry, but it is what it is. You know, today's the only day I can film, so I'm really sorry for that. I'm also sorry if you can hear a little bit of guinea pig noise in the background. It's just I've given the girls their breakfast, so they're just having a little bit of food. If you see me glancing down, it's because I've written myself a few notes. There's a lot to talk about and I don't want to go off on a tangent too much, so I've written some notes so that I can tell you everything that I wanted to say. So get comfy, get yourself a cuppa, and I will tell you all about my experiences with having a premature baby. So I'll start off just by sort of giving you some background information. I have done a video on this before, very briefly, and just touched on the infertility troubles that I had before Abby was born. So not long after James was born, we decided that we'd really like another child, and we had a really tough time conceiving. I had 3 miscarriages, and then I also had 3 ectopic pregnancies in the process, so this was all within like a 2-year time frame. I had the 3 miscarriages first, then I had my ectopics. So the first ectopic that I had was it was quite late on that they discovered that it was an ectopic pregnancy. And if you don't know, an ectopic pregnancy is just where the egg is fertilised in one of your fallopian tubes. As we're going through this video, there will be things, procedures and bits and pieces, so I'll explain what they all mean in case anyone isn't sure. So the first ectopic pregnancy, they discovered it quite late, and it was quite far along. So unfortunately, the only choice that the doctor had at that point was to do a salpingectomy, which is the removal of the fallopian tube. So they removed that fallopian tube, and then I was just left with the one. The second ectopic that I had, they gave me some drugs. The drugs are called methotrexate, and those drugs kill fast-growing cells. The drugs are actually used for cancer treatment as well. So they give you those drugs, and unfortunately it kills the baby. But it was all that they could do. There was no saving the babies anyway, because obviously they were in my tube, so whatever happened, I was always going to lose the babies anyway. So I had the drugs the second time. The third time, again, it was quite late on. Unfortunately, with ectopic pregnancies, if you've had one, you're more prone to having the other. The doctors could never really give me any explanation why I had the ectopic pregnancies. One suggested that maybe after I'd had my C-section after having James, I had adhesions in my womb. They don't know for sure. So the third ectopic, they did another salpingectomy, so I was left with no tubes. So we knew that we wanted another child, and the only option that was left to us was to have IVF. So we approached my GP, who told us that for IVF, because we had a child already, we wouldn't be eligible for an NHS funding, so we'd have to self-fund. Where I live in Manchester, there are 2 private IVF clinics. One's called Manchester Fertility Services and one is called Care, and we ended up going with Manchester Fertility Services because one of the consultants who works there is a leading specialist in miscarriages and early loss expert, so we thought that it would be good to go to see that clinic and to have him as my consultant. So that's what we did. So the treatment costs were £5,000 per round of IVF, which we managed to get that money together, but we knew that we probably would just have the 1 round. So if 1 round didn't work, then we would stop, call it a day, and if 1 didn't work, then accept that, you know, that was the way that it had to be. So I went for my consultation, and the first thing that I tried to do was I tried to egg share. So that's where you would go through a round of IVF, and then half the eggs that you would get would be given to a lady who didn't have any eggs of her own, or, you know, she was older, she didn't have any way of having the IVF treatment herself. So if you do that, you get reduced treatment. I think you get about a third of the cost back from the treatment. But when I went to have the testing done that you need to have done for egg sharing, just to see, you know, if you're eligible, they found out that actually I don't have a very good ovarian reserve. So they call it an AMH. And they give you a score, and to be able to egg share you need an AMH of around 16, and mine was 2.4, so I didn't have anywhere near enough eggs to be able to share with someone else, which I was really sad about, because I was hoping that through all of this maybe I could help somebody else, but that wasn't to be. So I went through and we got the green light to start our treatment, and when you start the treatment you get this big box full of the drugs, so it's like, I think I had about 40 injections. So you have one kind of drug, and then at a certain point when the doctors tell you that you're ready, you switch to another kind of drug, and the first drug puts you in a kind of menopause, and let me tell you, I'm not looking forward to the menopause if it's anything like the time that I had with having the Preserolin. So you do an injection every day into your tummy, and then you go for scans and checkups at the fertility clinic, and at a certain point when they're happy with the size of your follicles and everything that's growing inside, then they will tell you to do another type of injection that kind of triggers off for the eggs to be released. It's really interesting. I was actually really interested in the whole process. So we went through, and for some reason for me it took ages for the follicles to grow, so I ended up having to do the stimming, they call it stimming. I ended up having to stim for like an extra 2 weeks almost. So in the end I had, you know, a lot longer than I thought I would have going through the treatment. So at the point where I went to have the eggs removed, they got 11 eggs, so they then mix my eggs with my husband's sperm, and then they let everything grow. The day after, they phoned us to say of the 11, only 2 had actually fertilised, so there were 9 that didn't fertilise, and I was gutted. You know, law of averages, I was just thinking there's no way that these little tiny babies are going to make it. They say that between the fertilisation and the transfer, Lots of babies, fail to grow, they don't make it. So it's awful that those days in between the phone call to say that we just had the 2, and then they can either do a transfer at day 3 or day 5, and because there was just the 2, the clinic told us it would be best to do a day 3 transfer. So they phone you, and they just say, right, you need to come in now. So it's all a bit crazy, because you just don't know when you're going to get the call and what you're going to have to do. So I got the call to say that both babies were still alive, and that they were going to do a day 3 transfer of these embryos. So they grade them, and I had 2 double grade A embryos. One was a 10 cell and one was an 8 cell, and I will put a little picture of the embryos in at this point here, because it's quite sweet really. Just before they do the transfer, the embryologist just shows you like a video screen, and you can see the little embryos, which is quite emotional really. So yeah, I had 2 really high quality embryos that they put in, and then it's a waiting game. You go through the 2-week wait to find out whether you're pregnant or not. You do a pregnancy test at the end of 2 weeks, and then you go from there really. But me being me, it wasn't a smooth process. I actually ended up having a complication with the IVF called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, which basically means that my ovaries were just producing fluid. So there's just fluid coming out of my ovaries all the time, and it was all spilling out into my abdomen and everything. I looked like 9 months pregnant a couple of days after the transfer, and all that we could do really was I was back and forth to A&E a couple of times, and in the end I had a drain put in so that we could try and drain some of the fluid away. But the only sort of shining light that I had through all of that was the consultant said people who have an OHSS as violent as that, he said it was actually one of the worst cases of OHSS that he had seen, tend to go on and have successful pregnancies. So it was a crazy time. I ended up being in hospital on James's 3rd birthday, so I missed his 3rd birthday. Not that I'm sure he realised he was, at a play centre with his daddy and all his friends, so I don't think he really realised what was going on. So after I had come out of hospital, I had been doing pregnancy tests, and I got the positive pregnancy test. And I was convinced I was going to be having twins. I thought, they're both top quality embryos. There was no way that there's just going to be one. So what happens is after you've done your positive test at the end of the 2 weeks, then you go in and have a scan at the fertility clinic for them to check that they're happy with everything before you then go on to have the normal care that you have at hospitals. And that sort of, that process. So I went in fully prepared to see 2 heartbeats, but when we got there was just the one, and it sounds terrible, but it took me a long time to come to terms with the fact that there was just one there, which is awful because, I had a healthy baby, which was all I'd wanted for 2 years. But it took me a long time to come to terms with the fact that it was just one. So the pregnancy itself was pretty straightforward after that. So I had the fluid removed at hospital, but I never really sort of went back down to looking normal. So obviously when you have your first baby, you don't really show for 4 months or so. Whereas when I'd had the OHSS, I looked 9 months pregnant, and I continued to look really pregnant for practically the whole of the pregnancy. There were no other real complications. I had really bad morning sickness for up until almost 20 weeks. But other than that, there were no real problems, nothing that I had to worry about during the pregnancy. Scan, they told me that I had placenta previa, which basically just means the placenta is in the way. It's covering the cervix, so obviously the baby can't come out if the placenta's in the way. So I had quite a few extra scans, just in case the placenta did move, but it never did, and I was fully prepared that I would need a C-section. And I was fine about it. At the end of the day, I just wanted my little girl to be born safely, and as long as that was all fine, I didn't really care about the birth. I'll tell you a bit about the birth story now. I'm quite conscious that this video is going to be really long, so I'm sorry, but I'll tell you about the birth. So I was working from home. I was 34 weeks pregnant, working from home. I was on the phone to, I think, like the HR director, the managing director. Was on a conference call to some people as well as my manager, and I just felt my waters go. So hung up the phone all dramatic, went to the toilet to sort of see how bad it was, and to change myself and all those other things, and as well, my waters had gone and there was a lot of blood there, so I freaked out big time. Luckily, James was at my mum's that day. I used to have him on a Monday whilst I was at work. So James was taken care of. I didn't need to worry about him. I was phoning Chris and he was in a meeting and he didn't see the calls, and because I was only 34 weeks, he wasn't on any kind of alert. He didn't have his phone glued to him, because it was so soon. None of us could have predicted what was going to happen. So I was flipping out. I phoned an ambulance. I was shaking like a leaf. It was so terrifying. So the ambulance came, and I live on a street. It's a one-way street, and it's got a school on the street. Is the school that James goes to. So I phoned the ambulance. The ambulance came. It blocked the road, so parents couldn't get down the road to park up and to sort themselves out. So the ambulance, it was only probably 10 minutes. The ambulance was there, so it wasn't that bad. But the ambulance came and they took me over to the hospital where I was booked in. So I live in North Manchester, and the hospital that I was booked into was in Central Manchester, just because I knew the hospital really well, and that was where James was born, and it made me feel calmer knowing that I was booked into St Mary's to have Abby. So when I got in the ambulance, they were umming and ahhing about whether they were prepared to drive me over to St Mary's, and I was begging because that's where I wanted to go. Chris at the time was working in Manchester city centre as well, so it's probably half an hour drive from our house to the hospital. So the ambulance drove me over, and I was having not really regular contractions, but they were sort of semi-regular. So we got over to the hospital, and they did an assessment, and they said, right, well, we've probably got time to give you one steroid injection, which just helps the baby's lungs to mature. Just there's not an awful lot they can do at that point. Some babies are born and they don't even get one steroid injection. I think they like to try and give you 2 if they can, just to help the baby. So they gave me one steroid injection. At this point, Chris had managed to see the messages that I'd left him, and he met me over at the hospital, and we sort of waited around for a bit. And even though I was still bleeding a little bit, and obviously my waters had gone at that point, I said to Chris, oh God, nothing's going to happen for ages now. I mean, she's not due for weeks and weeks yet. Why don't you go home, chill out for a bit, make sure that James is sorted out, and then come back. So James stayed at my mum's in the end that night, and Chris got home here, and within about 10 minutes, 15 minutes of him getting home, then he got a phone call from the hospital to say, please can you come back, for taking her down to theatre. So they decided that I did need to go down to theatre. The contractions were getting more and more regular, and because I did have placenta previa, it definitely would have to be a C-section. So they took me down, and all this time I was praying that Chris was going to get back. I was praying that he wasn't going to miss the birth. I mean, obviously I would have been fine, you know, I would have coped, but I was terrified of what was going to happen. I was terrified that this little baby was going to be so poorly, and, you know, what if I lost her? It was all, everything was going through my head, and I really needed Chris, just for a little bit of support. So he made it with like minutes to spare before they took me down to theatre. So she was born, and her birth weight was £5.14, and they took her away. Just the paediatricians just had a little look at her, but they basically said that, you know, she was doing so well, there was no real reason for her to go into special care, and that she could just, you know, come back with me on the ward, which was amazing. I was so grateful that she was well and there were no complications. So she came back on the ward with me, and overnight the nurses were a bit concerned that she was looking a little bit jaundiced, and apparently it's quite common for prem babies to have jaundice. So she had to have some phototherapy, which just means they go in a cot with like a special UV light over the cot, to try and give them as much like, it's not proper sunlight, is it, but as much man-made sunlight as possible, and then they go through a period of having phototherapy for 12 hours, and then they test their blood to see if they're getting better, if the jaundice is improving, and I think she had to have, I think, 3 sessions of phototherapy before she was better, and before they were prepared to let her come home. So she came home. I had a little bit of trouble feeding her in hospital, but I just put that down to just her being prem and, you know, not trying to worry too much. So we got her home, and the community midwife came round and had a look at her, and they weighed her, and she'd lost £1, and I was devastated, because, you know, she was only £5.14 when she was born anyway. James was like £9.10, so I was used to this massive baby who needed, you know, 1-month-old clothes at birth, and then I had this tiny dolly who was just, she was so tiny. So the community midwife weighed her, and she'd lost £1, and then she was kind of giving her a bit of a checkup, and she says, and what are they doing about her tongue tie? And I said, what do you mean, tongue tie? I haven't, you know, no one spoke to me about this. And she said, your baby's got tongue tie. And if you don't know, tongue tie just means that your tongue has got like a little sort of a bit of a membrane like underneath. I can't show you and talk at the same time, but like that part underneath your tongue is like attached with like a little bit of a membrane, and Abby's was 100% tongue tied, which means to the very edge of her tongue this membrane sort of stretched all the way out, and she was having trouble feeding because she had the tongue tie. So the community midwife did absolutely everything that she could to try and get her booked in to have a frenulotomy, which basically just means they cut that membrane away to improve the tongue tie. But because she was only 34 weeks, they weren't prepared to do the operation until she was 37 weeks. So for 3 weeks, I had this tiny baby who wasn't feeding. The community midwife said it would be better if I could breastfeed her because of her prematurity, where she needed it. I was trying to breastfeed her during the day, and then at night time when she was really tired, I was expressing and doing a bottle feed at night so that she was getting enough, because I found that at night time she wasn't hardly feeding properly because she was so tired. She used to wake up for a feed, have like a tiny bit, and then she'd drop off again because she was so tired. So finally, at 37 weeks, the Oldham Hospital agreed to do the frenulotomy, and then her weight did improve. So I'll insert some pictures here of her when she was at hospital, and a couple of the pictures of her when she was tiny. There's a picture I've got of her when she was just lay on the bed, and I'm holding one of her legs, and you can just see her leg is so tiny. Okay, I've found something to scale so you can get a sense of what it was like. So this is one of Abby's dollies, and these were the nappies that she used to wear. So Pampers do a size 0 nappy, so that is the size of a micro nappy. They are literally like the tiny. And I just found as well another little t-shirt that she used to wear. So like these little tiny t-shirts, like they literally fit on like baby Katie. After she'd had the frenulotomy, it improved. Her weight gradually crept back up. It took months and months and months though before she was into normal size nappies and normal size clothes. All of the clothes are from the tiny baby section. And now she is a very healthy, happy, almost 3-year-old little girl. I got it quite easy, really. You know, we didn't have daily trips to the special care unit. We didn't have any of those kinds of health complications. But, you know, World Prem Day isn't something that everybody knows about, obviously. You know, if you've never been in that situation, never had any friends or family, anyone who's had to go through looking after a prem baby, then you wouldn't know. So it's a subject that's really close to my heart. After Abby was born, I did a lot of crochet, and I made lots of things to send to the special care and the neonatal units. You know, little cardigans, little hats. They're always desperate for, you know, those kinds of things. Anything that, you know, a teeny tiny baby can wear. As a mother, I feel so helpless anyway, so I can't even imagine. I've got some friends who had babies who spent a lot of time in special care and in neonatal, and the small things like, you know, seeing your baby being able to have a little hat on, or perhaps a little jumper. I know some midwives in some places have learnt to crochet, and, you know, for like Halloween, make like little capes and little glasses, crochet like goggles, you know, for the babies. So if you're a crafty person, and there is anything that you can make, you know, you could always send it off to your local neonatal unit or special care unit, because I'm sure that they'd be really grateful of any kind of items. If you're watching and you're the mum of a prem baby, or you've been through any of this situation, you know, I'm just sending out my love and support to you. If you're a nurse or a doctor who works in special care, I think you're awesome. It must be such an emotional job every day to be going in and you know, looking after these tiny babies. So just be aware on the 17th of November, World Premature Day. So that's sort of my story. Thank you so much for watching. I know it's been a long one, but I didn't want the day to go by without, just giving a shout out really, talking about World Prem Day, and giving lots of love and support to anybody who works with prem babies, anyone who works within IVF, anyone who deals, with early pregnancy units, nurses who look after mums like me who had miscarriages, mums who have had ectopic pregnancies. Basically what I'm saying is, if you work in a hospital and you look after babies or women, pregnant women, you're awesome. Quite frankly, anyone who works in a hospital is pretty awesome as far as I'm concerned. So I'm going to stop there because I'm rambling now. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all soon. Bye.